All right, guys, we're going to do a sort of a play and response video today. Video by VR Voyager. It's got the intriguing, enticing, you might even say a little bit clickbaity title. Is the PSVR2 is finished? Now, I did read that right. It's called Is the PSVR2 is finished? I don't know if you might want to go back to the drawing board on that title and practice your grammar a little bit there, VR Voyager. But let's get cracking. Oh, I'm making this video because he basically declares the PSVR2 to be an abject failure and to be dead already. And so I left a comment sort of voicing my disagreement with that analysis. And he then replied and blocked me, which is curious because he came over to my channel and left a comment on one of my videos, but then blocked me on his channel. So it's kind of cake and eat it situation there for him. So I thought I'd do a video response. Maybe you'll see it, maybe you won't. Let's get cracking. I like the music. So he says, this one's all about Sony's abject failure, so you might piss off the Sony fanboys, he says in text in the start of the video. Definitely not a Sony fanboy. Through my gaming career, I started off with Sega, I had a Game Boy, and I got, well, after that, Nintendo consoles mainly for quite a while, Xbox, original Xbox and 360. Never really had a PS2 or PS3. I shared a PS1 with friends at a shared house, but you know, I was always Sega, bit of Nintendo, then Microsoft. The first time I really got into a Sony console in a big way was PS4, because I wanted the VR. I tried it at a friend's house and thought it was amazing, so I went and got PS4 Pro, and that was the first time that I ever really was on the PlayStation side of things. So I'm definitely not a Sony fanboy, but okay. And he just explains that there's a part of the video that's blurry intentionally, so let's interpret that. Let's see what he's got to say then, VR Voyager, come on.
So guys, the PSVR2 is done. There's no other way to put it, as by all accounts, the first year since launch of Sony's second foray into the VR space has been an absolute disaster.
There's no other way to put it. He says, by all accounts, it's been a failure. By all accounts, on all fronts, it's been a failure. So we're starting off with some ridiculous hyperbole. So you'll see from the video that his main argument is that it hasn't matched the sales of the Quest, which we'll get into why that's a ridiculous comparison to make in a bit. But by all accounts, on all fronts, it's been a failure. Let's forget the fact that it's the only headset on the market that has head haptics. It's the cheapest headset with eye tracking by a factor of at least 3, I think, maybe 2. There's not many headsets that have eye tracking. This has become clear to be a very important advancement for VR. Of course, it gives a huge performance boost, being able to use dynamic foveated rendering, and obviously the gameplay applications of eye tracking are amazing as well. Anyone that's played Synapse knows that insane immersive feeling that you get of having, like, feeling like you really do have telekinesis, just looking at objects and being able to manipulate them because you've looked at it. It's such a trip, so fun. There's so many cool applications, and I'm sure we haven't seen the best of it yet. But yeah, eye tracking, it brings that. It is the cheapest high-end VR headset on the market by a huge margin. It's recently got PC support, so you'll probably see PC VR gamers choose that headset for those people that want to really max out performance, because yeah, so it has, to say it's failed on all fronts, you're ignoring the technological innovation that it's bringing. You're also ignoring the fact that Sony is the only company investing in true current gen AAA games for VR. You know, there isn't any others. There are no other headsets or companies that have invested in true current gen AAA quality VR games. There aren't any. And in the PlayStation VR2's first 12 months, we got more AAA VR games than there have been on all other headsets. throughout the entire VR industry over the last 3 or 4 years. The last one of any note was really Half-Life Alyx, and that was 3 years ago. And even that, if you've actually played Half-Life Alyx, it's a pretty game. It's got great physics. It's very linear. It's basically down corridors. It's not open world. It's not large in scope. It's beautiful, and it's a great show. It's a great showcase for how it can feel to be in VR. But it isn't a large game. It's kind of a push to even call that really a AAA game in terms of scope. But let's say it is. Okay, then Sony's got an equivalent in Call of the Mountain. It's the same level of graphical fidelity and VR mechanics and wow factor, but quite linear, but certainly a high quality experience. So if PlayStation VR2 has got Call of the Mountain to rival Half-Life Alyx, it's also got, of course, Resident Evil Village, Resident Evil 4, Gran Turismo 7, No Man's Sky. Those are huge AAA games, and they're only available in a legitimate form on PlayStation VR2. And so Sony has invested more than any other company in current gen AAA VR. I mean, people will bring up, oh, Asgard Wrath 2. Yeah, big game, fun game by all accounts. It looks like a PS2 game. If you're going to call that AAA VR, fine. But then you have lowered the bar significantly, and you will have to also include a lot of the sort of B-grade titles that are available on PlayStation VR2 as well. So again, I'm getting into a lot of the aspects of the argument here because it trips off the tongue. You know, it's quite easy to go through why this sort of perspective is flawed. So it all comes out, and hopefully I won't reiterate or repeat myself too much in this video, but it's quite crazy to say that PSVR 2 has failed on all fronts by all accounts. Okay, you could say it's sold less than the Quest. You can't say it hasn't innovated with the tech, with the hardware. You can't say it hasn't got a great software library. You can't say that, especially when you compare it to the first year of any other headset. Okay, so the PlayStation VR 2 started from scratch. It wasn't natively backwards compatible. So for a headset that is solely reliant on its current releases and can't, claim to already have a back catalogue of games that have been released previously already, like the Quest 3. When the Quest 3 came out, it automatically had the library of the Quest 2 games. But if you take the first year of the Quest 2's life and compare those titles to the first year of titles on PlayStation VR 2, there's no competition whatsoever. So anyway, getting into the reads a little bit, let's crack on.
Whether we're talking about the seemingly disappointing number of headsets sold.
Seemingly? By what metric? By what metric is it a seemingly disappointing number of headsets? Obviously they'll have wanted to have sold more, but when you look at anything to do with economics, you have to take into account the whole picture of what drives sales, what is restricting sales, bottlenecks, circumstances, that kind of thing. It's quite, and let's go into this point right now because it's one of the most important things to point out. It doesn't make any sense to compare PSVR 2 sales with Quest sales for a couple of reasons. The most obvious one being Meta is able to sell their headset to anybody, okay? Anybody with a passing interest in VR is a potential customer for Meta, for a Quest. It's a standalone unit. You don't need anything else. It's all in one box. You're good to go. You buy the Quest, you're in VR, right? Sony can only sell and market PSVR 2s to people that already own a PS5. There is a huge bottleneck there. So it's ridiculous to say that it doesn't make any sense to compare sales. They're not selling to the same market. They're not under the same conditions. To get into PSVR 2, you need a PS5 already. That's $1,000. to anyone who's looking to sort of experiment with VR, new potential people that haven't tried VR before, let me see what VR is all about. They're obviously going to go for the cheapest, most simple, most accessible option, and that's standalone. And that's before you even talk about the fact that the Quest is so heavily subsidized that Meta is reportedly selling it at a loss because they've got insane levels of money. Meta is one of the wealthiest companies on the face of the planet, and it is able to take a loss on hardware sales. We are, by all accounts, the Sony is not selling the PSVR2 at a loss, and yet it's still managing to provide the cheapest high-end headset by a factor of at least 2. If you try and get a comparable quality headset for PC, you're going to spend over $1,000 on the headset alone. And quite often there's on top of that, you've got your lighthouse tracking, your controllers, and of course the PC. The PlayStation VR2, a lot of devs have been saying, is outperforming high-end PC rigs that cost $3,000 to set up: PC, tracking, headset, all the rest of it. If you want comparable quality of experience on a PC, you're spending around $3,000. For PSVR2 and PS5, you can get that level of quality for around $1,000, but it's still a huge amount of money for most people. So if you're just someone who has a passing interest, you're trying to dabble with VR and see what it's all about, you're new to it maybe, or as a present, as a gift, you know, little Johnny, you can just whack a Quest under the tree for little Johnny and let him try it out, and it's all contained. You don't have to worry about it. He's got the headset there. He's good to go for $300 or now $200. The Quest 2 has been reduced to $200. A genius move, of course, by Meta. Even if they are making a huge loss, they're obviously clearing out the stock they've got of Quest 2s and reducing it in price, and that'll get people into the Quest ecosystem, of course, and committed. And once you've paid for your library of Quest 2 games, you're far more likely to stay in that ecosystem and then later on just go on and get a Quest 3 as well anyway. So it's a genius move by them, but it's much more accessible, it's much cheaper to get into. You know, back in the day, I'm old enough to remember the Neo Geo, right? A fantastic console. And it must have sold, 50 times less than the Super Nintendo ever did. Nobody called the Neo Geo a failure because it didn't sell as many, or it sold hugely less than the Super Nintendo. Nobody called Neo Geo a failure. It was, first of all, it was marketed, it was for a different market. There's sort of hardcore gamers who were willing to spend more to get a higher quality experience in many regards. But yeah, let's carry on. I'm sure we'll get back to those.
Current lack of pretty much any first-party games.
Right, so what does that mean? Current lack of pretty much any first-party games. I wish I had the list with me now. I didn't prepare for this. I just turned the camera on and let's start talking. But there is I'll put it in the information bar below. I'll find it. There is a quite long list of games that Sony has invested in for the PlayStation VR2. So they've not only had the first-person games, GT7, right? Their main financial contribution to VR software so far has been in funding third-party and second-party, you might call, studios to bring their games to PlayStation VR2. You've got Synapse, of course. They also paid for Capcom to add the VR mode for free for us for Resident Evil Village and Resident Evil 4. They are paying millions of dollars to third-party studios to add VR to their AAA titles and bring them to Sony's platform. So they're paying for that. That wasn't Capcom doing us a favor, right? They also paid for studios like the guys who made Song in the Smoke to upgrade their game quite significantly and bring it to Sony's platform and give us that update for free. They also helped to fund Legendary Tales, which the developers have told us in interviews that, you know, they were starting to run out of money when they were self-funding it on the PC platform. It didn't get into the final form that they wanted it to be. Sony came in and helped them to complete the game to the standard that it is now. So Sony didn't shout about this. They didn't announce that they'd helped fund this creation of this or completion of this game. They did feature it on one of their state of plays. So Legendary Tales is a game everybody's raving about, really cool, large scale, quality VR game that Sony helped finance. Um, so they've been putting a lot of money into the software, into the software library. At the same time, of course, as investing, God knows, probably hundreds of millions into the R&D of VR over 2 generations now. Nintendo haven't done anything. Okay, Labo. You want to bring Labo? Let's bring Labo into it. Sorry, Nintendo did have a little go with that cardboard VR cut out DIY thing. Bless them. Microsoft binned HoloLens and hasn't done anything for VR. Uh, you know, Sony has spent 2 generations now invested in VR. And look at the amazing list of games we had on PSVR1. Do you think they're just going to abandon PSVR2 after a year? Well, we're already seeing them make moves to expand PSVR2's appeal with its recent announcement that it's going to have. It does already now. It does now have PC support, and they will continue to develop that. But people seem to be making this distinction that it has to be first-party Sony games. First-party Sony games. That's the only type of game that we're going to count as a PSVR2 credit to a credit to Sony. Okay, we're going to ignore all of the games that they have paid millions and millions of dollars to companies to add VR modes, upgrade VR games, bring them to the Sony PlayStation VR2, often with free upgrades. Ignore all that. Where's the literal first party games? But of course, it's been said before, but I'll tell VR Voyager again, if he doesn't realise this, that Sony has been quiet about pretty much all of its first party studios over the last 18, 24 months. They really haven't said a lot. They've got over 20 studios. We don't know what most of them are working on. They haven't been speaking about their first party stuff. And there's various reasons for that. You know, they're market leaders. They don't need to start talking about their projects a long time before they come out. They don't need to do it. They're already sitting pretty above Xbox. You could say Switch is it's again it's a different market, isn't it? We don't typically see that competing with the Xbox and the PlayStation, but yeah, they've been quiet about all of their first party stuff. We know about a couple of games that are coming. We don't know about what 20 studios worth of in-house developers they're working on. We don't. And again, they're market leaders, but also because this is my opinion. You know, they had that recent switch away from their focus on gas games. They told a lot of studios to work on games as a service games, and they seem to have rode back from that. And so that's probably put a big spanner in the works of some of their major studios. So, you know, they're taking the time to speak to us about what they're working on, which is, but again, yeah, it's this, for some reason, ignoring every other project that Sony has put money into for their headset, every other game that they've helped fund, and it's saying none of that matters. We need first party games. That's it. It's the only ones that matter. It's ridiculous. What matters is, to who does that matter? If you're someone sat at home with a VR headset, you just want to have fun. You want to have fun with your VR headset. Can you have fun on PSVR 2 right now? I am drowning in games. My backlog is ridiculous. I am buying too many games that I don't have the time to get to. It's quite ridiculous. Let's carry on.
Or Sony's own disinterest with investing further into the medium.
Disinterest with investing further into the medium. I just reiterate there, I've pointed out, it's the only headset on the market to have head haptics. It's by far the cheapest out of a very small number of headsets that has eye tracking. It is pushing, and it's the only headset to have adaptive triggers and high definition advanced haptics in the controllers, right? So it's pushing the medium of VR forward in various different ways. You can't say that it isn't. If you deny those innovations, you're being disingenuous for the sake of clout, I guess. I don't know. Doom mongering seems to get clicks these days, so perhaps that's it. But it might be a case of, he's read one too many articles, clickbaity articles, and decided that that's the truth. But it doesn't stand up to scrutiny, this doom mongering analysis.
Any way you slice it, Sony's PSVR2 is absolutely finished. Welcome to the simulation.
Any way you slice it, absolutely finished.
Inside the simulation, I am Too Damn Golden, your VR Voyager, and today we're going to be analyzing the remarkably swift downfall of the PSVR2 and breaking down why this is a terrible thing for VR.
Remarkably swift downfall. It's been out a year. They sold 600,000 units in the first 2 months. I don't know how many it is now. I'm sure I think have they said over 1 million in the first year? I mean, like I explained before, you have the bottleneck of the PS5, so they can only sell to people that have the PS5, and the market is very different now to when PSVR1 was out. That was the most easily accessible high-end VR experience that you could have on PSVR1. The Quest came in a little bit later, especially the Quest 2, because not many people had a Quest 1. It was obviously very proto sort of Quest. Not a lot on it, not a lot of people had it, it wasn't that great. Quest 2 is where it really picked up, and that didn't come out until halfway through, even closer towards the end or second half of the PSVR 1's lifespan. So now the market that the PSVR 2 came into was very different already. So, but you can't compare it to standalone. It doesn't make any sense. If you compare it to PC VR sales, it's a very different comparison. And that's a fairer comparison in terms of the investment required to attain it, and to the level of quality of experience as well. On a Quest standalone, without PC, of course. So if you try and add a PC to it, a Quest can run PC VR. Yeah, but you need a fucking PC that costs about $2,000. So this doom-mongering narrative about PSVR 2 requires various different double standards, mental gymnastics, to try and make the case that PSVR 2 has failed. It's not selling as many as Quest. But you know what? The Aston Martin, whatever posh version, I don't know about cars, but if you try and say a Ferrari, is it a Ferrari Mondo, whatever, sold far fewer than a Ford Fiesta, doesn't mean the Ferrari is a failure. Doesn't mean it's shit. Just because it sold less, you're making an irrelevant comparison there. It's the same with this.
As a whole. It is absolutely no secret that many individuals who jumped onto the PSVR2 bandwagon have been feeling increasingly jaded over the course of the past year. And
who are you talking to? First of all, bandwagon. It's just loading this analysis with negative assumptions and just biased language. It's ridiculous. You're trying to report on something objective, but your language is entirely subjective. Bandwagon. What are you on about? And who are you talking to? Because I'm in communities of thousands of people that are obsessed with this thing and absolutely loving it. Can't get enough of it. Don't have enough time to play the huge number of games that they have been interested in and bought, and have amassed a backlog that they haven't got time to get through. Drowning in games. So who are you talking to that's disillusioned with this thing? And he put some comments up on the screen. Yeah. Problem with this is I find it. I'm very cynical. Cynical, the right word? Distrusting, sort of suspicious, really, of a lot of internet commenting these days. There's a lot of bot farms. There's a lot of trolls. There's a lot of that kind of stuff going on. So, if you go into a Facebook group for PSVR2, there'll be mainly people that are happy with the thing, but every now and again you'll see posts that are quite clearly trolling and trying to just get a reaction from people that are pretending that it's a load of shit and talking down on it. So it's difficult to really trust the comments, but there are communities of thousands out there that are absolutely loving this thing. But all right.
When looking for the reasons why, well, honestly, you don't really need to look that hard at all. Purveyors of the PSVR2, quite simply put, don't have any meaningful games to play at the moment, and Sony
don't have any meaningful games to play. If you buy a PSVR2 today, it's the only place that you can legitimately play Resident Evil 8, Resident Evil 4, GT7, No Man's Sky in VR, the best version of all multiplats. The best version is 99 times out of 10 on the PSVR 2. That other one, it might be on the PC. It's never the best version on the Quest. Not that this doom mongering about PSVR 2 is always placed within the context of a competition with the Quest headset, right? A huge number of the games that are coming out on Quest are also coming out on PSVR 2. It's very similar game library. Multiplats. That's a thing. That's always been a thing. We never criticised consoles in the past for having multiplat games. In fact, we want them. We need them. We want all of the games we can get our hands on to have the choice of whatever is out there on the headset that you own. If it wasn't getting the multiplats, you could complain legitimately. So it has a lot of shared games across the headsets because they are third-party developers putting out their games on as many headsets as they can, right? And 9 times out of 10, the best version of those games are on PSVR 2 because you've got added haptics. A lot of the time you've got improved graphics. You've got eye tracking that brings advancements to many of these multiplats as well. You've got higher frame rates, higher resolutions, or obviously higher detail. Because the ironic thing is the PSVR 2 has a technically slightly lower resolution screen than the Quest 3, but because of the extra power of the PS5, you will get far more detailed environments on the PSVR 2 version of games because it can utilize that extra power as well as the eye tracking to make the games look better, even though it's technically got a lower resolution screen. So the Quest 3 might be quite sharp, but it can't display the level of detail render to the same standard, frames per second and detail, as the PSVR 2.
Doesn't seem to have any intent of changing that anytime soon. Both points of which we
doesn't seem to intend on changing that anytime soon. It's literally just announced that PSVR 2 will be compatible with PC. That's unprecedented. People have been asking for that since before the launch of the headset, and they've done it. It's opened up the headset to a whole new market, and we don't know how far they're going to take that yet, but that's exciting. And it shows that they are clued into this idea that the VR market is too small to box itself in. We all benefit when there's shared software, shared hardware to move the whole medium forward. And Sony has done more than most companies in the gaming space to move VR forward for the last 8 years. Over 2 generations have invested in VR. No one else is doing that in the console space. No one. So by what metric, by what comparison are you saying that they're not investing when they've spent 8 years investing in VR, bringing best-in-class features, only in-class features, like head haptics? These are no small things. They've invested hugely. It's ridiculous.
We'll touch on later in this video, but for now, we're going to work backwards and try to assess the why. Why is Sony, at least at face value, abandoning its shiny new toy only a year post-launch? Why?
At least at face value, abandoning. But according to who? Resident Evil 4 was only at Christmas. It was a few months ago. Legendary Tales only came out a few months ago. Okay. This period of the year is usually quiet for games. So if you're going by the last few months, although we have had a steady stream of awesome games coming out on the headset, this is traditionally a very quiet period for games. We start to get announcements in the summer, and the big games come out on the lead up to Christmas. So let's see, shall we? I'm pretty confident Sony's going to make some announcements about PSVR2 in the next few months. So we've got this showcase rumoured to be next month, and they might start talking then. But again, they've been quiet about pretty much all of that. We only know about a few of their projects across 20 odd studios. We know about Wolverine. I can't think of any others off the top of my head. I'm sure there's one or two that we know about, but we certainly don't know about what 20 odd studios, don't know exactly the number, it's over 20 in-house studios. We don't know what they're all doing. And many of these studios are big enough to have more than one project on the go. So there's a stupid amount of content that Sony isn't talking about for flat screen and no doubt for VR. So their quietness is not a measure. If you're saying that the fact they haven't talked about first-party VR games means that they're giving up on the PSVR2, then you would also have to say that they've given up on PS5 for the same reason, that they haven't spoken about their PS5 first-party games. They have said that they haven't got any major franchise first-party games coming out until next year. So again, economic conditions have led to the situation that we're in now, post-pandemic. A lot of effects from that. This shift away from gas games, and the fact that people are skint and they know this. People have less disposable money right now because of what's been going on the last several years. But all these things are relevant when you're talking about the economics of a situation. So when you say that this is a luxury purchase that requires $1,000 to invest in, then it's very relevant to talk about the wider economic circumstances and what might drive people's decisions when buying luxury items. And of course, and for VR as well, being a novel medium that most people haven't tried before, that are going to be new to, going to be buying their first headsets, they're going to buy a standalone, a simple, cheap solution. Not the best solution, not the best performing, not the most high-end VR experience, but the cheapest and most accessible. So, that is a circumstance that is out of Sony's control. There's nothing that they could do to upend those purchasing priorities of most people that are going to be new to VR or buying VR as a gift for somebody else. Yeah, they could have spent and put themselves into debt and spent 500 million on AAA, full-length, huge VR-only games. It would not change the purchasing priorities of most people that are new to VR. It's not going to make a difference. You still have to spend over $1,000 to dip your toe into this new unfamiliar medium, or get a $200 Quest and just have a gamble. Doesn't matter about the software. That's not what's driving most people's VR purchasing decisions. But even given that, it is nonsense to say that Sony hasn't invested in the software side as well as the hardware.
Aren't they announcing any new games for their headset for the most part? And why did they even put out the damn device in the first place if they weren't going to support it? Now,
oh, Jesus Christ. I'm not going to be able to do this entire video because I'll end up repeating myself. There'll be no point. But hopefully, after what I've already said, you can see how that statement is self-evidently ridiculous. Why are they not investing? Okay, already addressed that.
continuing both mine and George Lucas's trend of working backwards, I'm going to answer that last question first, with the answer invariably being that Sony most definitely expected a much larger boom in the VR space after 2020's explosive growth. But this, of course, was partly spearheaded by the global pandemic, forcing people to look for alternative means of socializing with one another during extended stay-at-home orders, which in turn did lead to a nearly 32% increase in VR content content during 2020 when compared to 2019. But for those of you like myself who have been engrossed in the world of VR, you can feel the energy that has been leaving the space as of late, with 2021 and 2022 serving as VR's highlight moment thus far, as thanks to the phenomenally successful Quest 2, VR was pushed to the
phenomenally cheap in comparison Quest 2. But yeah, that's done well. But yeah, the whole VR market is sort of slowed down. The growth has slowed down, certainly. And PC VR is all but dead. If it wasn't for the mod community, PC VR would be dead. There's no games coming out for PC VR. There aren't any. It's entirely centered now at the moment on the modding community. Without that, it'd be dead. And on Quest, yeah, it's sold well, but you are restricted to this PS2 era graphics. We want more. We want to advance the medium, don't you? As you know, I'm ready for the next level. The high fidelity VR experiences, the technical innovations, you know, and that's the only place you can get that at the minute is on PSVR2, and I hope that other headsets, future headsets, I hope that eye tracking becomes a standard. It's so important for boosting boosting performance, but also for these innovative, trippy, just really amazing immersive gameplay features that you can get from eye tracking. So I hope that becomes a standard. Head haptics, I love I couldn't imagine playing VR now without the head haptics. Again, brilliant for immersion, and I hope it becomes standard, but it probably will never become standard on standalone, because if you had a standalone headset with head haptics and eye tracking, your battery is going to last about half an hour. So, you know, people make a big deal about, it's got to be wireless, it's got to be wireless. All right, fine. You go wireless, you're never going to get eye tracking and head haptics. It's not going to happen. Your battery will run out in half an hour, right? So Sony's bringing that high-end and new and special, innovative feeling to VR, and I really appreciate it. And you don't have to be a fanboy to point these out. You know, VR Voyager, you probably won't even see this, you won't respond, but if you do, I'd like you to address the points as they are and not try and make out that I'm only saying this because I'm some kind of Sony fanboy. There are negatives about the PSVR 2 as well. We can get into that if you like. Okay, negatives. I'm sure there's some negatives. See, people complain about the lenses, but that is a choice that has obviously been made because it accentuates OLED screens and HDR. So, you know, pancake lenses, yeah, they have a bigger sweet spot and everything, but personally, I value the HDR contrast and brighter colors and deeper blacks. I value that more than I do a large sweet spot. You know, because once you find the sweet spot, you're in it, and you quite easily find it every time you put the headset on. It's not a problem. That's only a teething problem that you have to try and work out the right way to wear a headset so that you have the optimal positioning. That's not a long-standing problem. That's the first few days. And I've got a video on my channel where I explain that in the first few days of PSVR 2, I was really disappointed because there were certain lens artifacts that weren't on the PSVR 1. I was like, oh, fuck, what's that about? Like very, very mild, but God rays. There's slight, very subtle God rays on PSVR 2. You didn't get any of that on PSVR 1. So I was like, what the fuck's that? I was disappointed. I couldn't get it comfortable for the first few days. I was really sad in the first week or so of having a PSVR 2. I'd been looking forward to that thing for so long. I put it on and it was not comfortable. I was mortified, I'm not going to lie. But then I realised I'd been wearing it wrong. I'd been trying to wear it in the same way as a PSVR 1, with the halo strap sort of horizontal. And actually, you have to angle it. You have to angle it so the halo strap is down at the back of the bottom of your head. So it's diagonal, like that. Where I was trying to wear it like this. And as soon as you get it right, and you have it in the right angle, and the weight distribution of PSVR2 and the comfort, it's very, very comfortable. But anyway, yeah, so I had problems with it to start off with. So, and I spoke about those publicly. So I'm not just fanboying, you know. I want the best VR experience, or rather, yeah, I do want the best VR experience, and and that's why I went with it. So.
Forefront of mainstream consciousness for the very first time. And surely the bigwigs over at Sony were of the belief that the VR perpetual growth train was going to continue chugging along. But 2023 was a nice slap in the face industry-wide, as according to a Circana report published in late November 2023, the VR AR market saw a 40% sales drop year over year, and for Sony, whose headset of...
So that's the whole market having a huge drop off. So another external market force that Sony can't control is the general level of interest in VR across the board. What do you want them to do? Do you want them to go around people's houses and force them to get into VR? It's like, at least he's acknowledging this industry-wide factor. But you know, the whole tone of this video is pointing the finger at Sony and saying, you don't care, you're not investing, you don't give a shit, blah, 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 nonsense.
First launched in February of that year, this was not the market trend that they wanted to see at all. As amid conflicting reports surrounding estimated sales projections arising even before the PSVR2's launch, the eventual and only sales figures released by Sony showed us that the headset had sold nearly 600,000 units in its first 6 weeks, slightly outperforming its predecessor, the PSVR, in the same period of time. But this again was back in May of last year, and of course it was.
And then what happened after that launch, that very successful launch? We have had a non-stop stream of smear articles and videos about PSVR2. So if you're someone who's just wondering about PSVR2, oh, Sony's got a VR headset, I'll go and see what people are saying about it. You go online and go PSVR2 reviews, or and you'll get a lot of fucking articles with the same bullshit talking points and the same bullshit analysis, saying that it's dead, saying that Sony aren't investing. I've already explained how that's not true. They paid multiple studios millions and millions of dollars to add VR modes to AAA games, to improve existing VR games, to bring those updates for free to PSVR2, backdoor financing of major releases like Legendary Tales, you know, helping various studios. There's so much they're doing for VR on the software side as well as the hardware side. So that's not true. But if you go and look for articles on PSVR2, you will find a lot of hit pieces. So it's going to make a huge difference there. I've explained how Sony have invested hugely and succeeded hugely in innovating on the hardware. And I've explained how they've invested hugely in the software as well. And this before we've even heard about the projects that they've got in the works. Let's not forget Astrobot, which everybody raves about and points to as, oh, we need Astrobot. Astrobot didn't come out in the first year of PSVR 1. I think it was 2 years in. Correct me if I'm wrong. I think it was 2 years in to the PSVR 1's life that we got Astrobot. And the investment in the games that have been made for the platform then started to come out. And towards the back half of the PSVR 1's lifespan, we saw amazing games, again, that Sony had helped fund, like Hitman, like Wipeout, Wipeout Omega Collection, amazing. You know, these weren't in the first year. It takes time for games that are greenlit for a new platform to get made, okay? So we will see that happen. So maybe you're just a bit impatient. Let's have this conversation again in another 12 months, okay?
Far less than initially projected by Sony, no doubt, considering the large number of PS5s floating around in the world, as well as the massively...
Well, you say that, but let's remember there was a huge delay to PS5s being readily available. And actually, PS5s were only readily available around, I want to say around 6, maybe 8 months before PSVR 2 came out. For the first 2 years of PS5's life, it was very limited availability. They were sold out everywhere. The chip shortage that we all know about contributed to that. Demand no doubt contributed, but the PS5 was not readily available for the first 2 years of its existence. So let's say the majority of people got into PS5 but only started to see them available in stores maybe 8 months before PSVR2. So you've spent your 500 odd bucks on a PS5 in somewhere in 2020 in 2022, right? Which is when they started to become readily available. You can actually order them or go into a shop and buy one. 2022 is when that started to happen. So you've spent your 500, then you've got some new games, you've got whatever else that goes with it. You've invested a huge amount in this console, and then 6-8 months later, a headset comes out for another 500 bucks. It's another economic circumstance that you really need to take into account when you're analysing this and drawing some conclusions about what's affected sales numbers. This huge bottleneck of PS5, which again had only just become readily available fairly recently before it came out, the headset came out. And again, to compare those sales to Meta and say that that means it's a failure when Meta can sell to anybody, no bottleneck, standalone, get a headset and you're away, it's not a useful comparison.
Increased VR market overall in 2023 when compared to 2016. Anyways, getting back on track, I must also introduce the fact that with regards to the 40% drop in VR.
He's showing footage of sign-ups there. That's good. There's an awesome game, and one of the games it showcases this eye tracking technology that has really added so much to VR. So yeah, it's exciting.
Sales year over year. The Quest 3 only launched in October 2023, so we only have a month's worth of these sales included in the figures, and this study also did take place before the big holiday season. But even if we assume that actual sales dropped to closer around 15 to 20%, this figure does not bode well for Sony, who once again just put this headset out a year ago, and it seems that at least in Sony's mind that they were a tad late with putting this one out. Now,
yeah, they probably would have wanted to put it out sooner, and maybe that was affected by, the fact that PS5s weren't readily available until midway through 2022. So they couldn't sell a PSVR headset when you can't walk into a store and buy the console that is required for the headset to run on. What's the point of trying to sell the headset? So yeah, they probably would have wanted to put it out sooner. That might explain why we had such a front-loaded launch. There's about 40 games at launch with multiple AAA games. They might have wanted to initially plan to space those out. So Call of the Mountain, Resident Evil Village, and Gran Turismo 7 all available on day one. Perhaps they initially intended for those to be spaced out. Who knows? But yeah, certainly again some more economic context to the trajectory of the sales of this thing, you know.
Of course, we're assuming that the Sony executives are of this mindset. I feel that it goes a long way towards answering the initial question posed. Why is Sony, at least at face value, abandoning its shiny new toy only a year post-launch?
According to it, they're not abandoning it. They've just opened it up to the PC market. They've literally, in the last few weeks, announced an expansion, a major fan-requested expansion to the PSVR2's market and appeal and applications. This is huge news. So no, on the face of it, they are expanding PSVR2's appeal. You're wrong. I don't know if you've just read too many of those hit piece articles and decided that is the truth and then reported on it without thinking too much about it, or if you just I can't imagine that anyone would come to this conclusion themselves without having been exposed to all of and he's repeating verbatim these nonsense arguments that we've heard before. So I don't know. We're very influenceable. Yeah.
may simply be more prudent from an economic standpoint to cut their losses with this one and focus on both the more profitable PS5 and the already rumored to be.
It may be prudent to cut their losses. So you're declaring that they've failed. They haven't. We've already gone there. And now you're telling them, just sack it off then. Just sack it off. So by your own metric, over the next year, when they haven't sacked it off, when they continue to invest in it, will you then make another video saying, well done Sony for staying with this platform and supporting those that love it, despite the fact that it's not a market leader, despite the fact that, you know, it hasn't sold as many as you might have wanted it to? Will you make that video? Will you make a video congratulating them for investing in a platform that is not hugely profitable? You know, maybe they care about the medium, they care about fun new ways to game, they care about innovation, and let's applaud that, you know. But again, they've brought huge innovation on the hardware side. They've made huge investment on the software side. The rest is optics. So I'm afraid videos like this by VR Voyager and articles like the ones that he seems to be parroting from various websites, those are going to put off potential buyers. This is a self-fulfilling doom prophecy. You're going to put people off even trying PSVR2 with stuff like this. People who don't know about the industry and haven't done their own research, listening to an opinion like this, are more likely to decide, no, I'm not going to try that then. Hopefully those people that are interested in checking out PSVR2 find other content creators that are more honest or more fair, more realistic, more enthusiastic, and actually displaying the great games on that system and talking about their experiences with them.
Coming relatively soon, PlayStation 6, and cut their losses they have, as just within the past month or so, we have seen the closure of Sony's London, UK studios, including layoffs over at Firesprite, the developers behind arguably the PSVR2's most recognizable title, Horizon Call of the Mountain, as part of a larger set of layoffs within the company itself.
Right, so they've had layoffs in various studios. Some studios that are responsible for games that have nothing to do with VR, right? London Studios has not made a VR game for 5 years. They were currently working on a gas game as a service game, right? They had not announced anything with VR. 5 years ago is their last VR game. But you're going to say that is proof that Sony's giving up on VR. Because a studio that hasn't made a VR game for 5 years is closing. It doesn't mean that they're not going to transfer projects that they are to other studios. You know, they might. Sony have got over 20 in-house studios. We don't know what most of them are doing. The whole industry has had massive layoffs. Many companies, many studios that have had nothing to do with VR have had huge layoffs because the whole gaming industry has shrunk. And some think also potentially because AI may be coming in to sort of jeopardize some jobs. I don't know enough about that to elaborate, but yeah, the whole industry shrunk and a lot of layoffs across a lot of companies. So that's not evidence of Sony giving up on VR.
So what this indicates to me is that Sony has significantly scaled back, if not completely stopped, its financial support of first-party VR titles and has instead focused on its primary endeavors while allowing third-party developers to do the heavy lifting games-wise. With recent rumors turning...
Let's see at the next showcase. If they don't announce anything first-party for VR in the next showcase, you'll have more of a point, and I can make another video saying, well, maybe VR Voyager was onto something. But I think it's a little too early to be deciding that they've thrown in the towel when they haven't yet spoken about their upcoming games.
Firm plans of PC VR compatibility circulating the VR space, indicating that this may be Sony's last-ditch pivot with regards to the PSVR2. And this...
How does that indicate that? You just pulled out your arse or you've again read it on some article somewhere and decided it's the truth, it's the only interpretation. Fans were requesting PC support for PSVR2 since before it even came out. The PC VR crowd would absolutely love to get their hands on this thing for the haptics, for the eye tracking, for the fact that it's the cheapest high-end headset with eye tracking by a long margin, by at least a factor of 2. You know, is it the VR show? Over $1,000 just for the headset. So it's been a requested thing. They've expanded PSVR2's appeal, and they're gonna create PSVR2 compatibility with the PC is an expansion of its appeal. How you're just deciding, or someone you've read has decided that means that, oh, it's a last-ditch effort. They're desperate. Oh, quick, sell a few more headsets to the PC crowd. It doesn't make any sense. If they were going to wind down investment in PSVR2 and they're going to stop making it, then they're just going to sell whatever headsets they've got left in the factory and say, that's it. That doesn't gel with opening it up to a new market in which you potentially will have to keep supporting that new market and making more headsets to satisfy demand in that new market. Doesn't make sense at all. It's not a sensible interpretation of that move.
Train of thought goes a long way towards us answering my second and ultimately most important question from earlier. Why hasn't Sony announced any new games for their headset?
Why hasn't Sony announced any new games for the PS5? It must mean they're giving up on PS5. Nope, it means they've got a schedule and you don't know it. That's it. That's all that means. You don't know what their roadmap is. That doesn't mean they haven't got one.
So in the here and now, it's easy to see why Sony has halted the production of new titles for the PSVR2 to what feels like...
Do you work at Sony? What do you mean? Sony has halted. He said this is a fact now, is it? VR Voyager. Sony have halted development of VR games. Do you work at Sony? Who told you this? No, where'd you get that from? You just don't know what they've got in the works. You don't know what they're making. That doesn't mean they're not making anything. 20 odd studios. Do you think they're all just sat around twiddling their thumbs going, oh, let's just wait for PS6 then, eh? PlayStation 6. Let's not bother. No, this generation's right off. Let's just put our feet up, have a cigar. Do you think that's what 20 odd in-house studios are doing? You don't know what any of them are doing. Very few. You know about Wolverine, one or two others maybe. You don't know about 20 odd studios that can handle several games at a time each are doing, right? You don't know their roadmap. It doesn't mean there isn't one.
Complete standstill, as we've already seen that the sales figures just aren't strong enough to justify the massive costs associated with VR game development.
Right, so this might be true, yeah. The VR market as it currently stands is not large enough to validate investment in VR only AAA games. The budget that it costs to make a true AAA current gen game, like a major Horizon game, okay, or a Grand Theft Auto, for example, is hundreds of millions, and you cannot justify it from a numbers perspective, from a business perspective, to invest that level of money in VR exclusive only games, right? You can't. It's business suicide at the minute because the market's not big enough. But despite that challenge, that it's a small market, it's got various different barriers to entry, a lot of friction compared to regular gaming. There's so many different reasons that keep VR from growing or keep people away from VR. Despite that, Sony are investing hugely in it and have done now for the last 8 years, over 2 generations, with multiple exclusives, first party and funding third party studios like Capcom. So shouldn't we applaud them for investing so much in VR, despite the fact that it's difficult to make money in VR? Isn't that something to applaud? It's real mental gymnastics to me to try and make that a negative.
Especially at a AAA level, which combined with a market that seems to be cooling off in its own.
Especially exactly at a AAA level, and the only place you can find native, real, genuine AAA VR is on Sony's platform now. That's the only place. If you go on standalone, you have to settle for PS2 era graphics. Asgard Wrath, awesome, fun game, big game. Assassin's Creed 2, mixed reviews, but pretty cool. But you wouldn't call it current gen AAA VR or AAA game. It's not, you know. Sony has the only AAA, current AAA, true. Get me words mixed up. You know what I'm saying. We've been through that before.
Right? And to me, the obvious approach of a wait and see becomes more and more apparent on Sony's side. But if we're just being honest, Sony's issues begin way before the conclusion of last year, as outside of this trio of launch titles, Horizon Call of the Mountain, Resident Evil Village, and of course Gran Turismo 7, the PSVR2 has seen a noticeable dearth of exclusive experiences for the platform, with only For Your Eyes, Break Stuff VR, the Dark Picture Switchback, Firewall Ultra, the Resident Evil 4 VR Remake, and Synapse hitting the PS Store as PSVR2 only titles since launch.
He says only, and then lists off a decent amount of games, and a few of which are really fucking significant. Resident Evil 4 Remake, voted as potentially the best game that's ever been made, and it's only playable on PSVR 2. Synapse, with these innovative eye tracking gameplay features. These are significant games, and you've just written them off. Oh, it's only these ones. Well, what's the exclusives on the Quest? In fact, you can compare it to Quest, and you can come up with Asgard's Wrath 2 and Assassin's Creed. But again, we've explained how comparing PSVR 2 to Quest doesn't make sense. So let's compare. Let's do a more direct, more sensible, more logical comparison to PC VR. And what has PC VR had in the last 3-4 years? You know, Alex was 3 years ago, and there's been nothing since. So this is the difficulty of the VR market, and despite that difficulty, despite all those barriers and that friction, Sony is still investing hugely in it. Let's applaud that. And if you have the headset, you will know that you're spoiled for choice, and I'm sure you're having a lot of fun with it. So no complaints here, you know.
Day. And while Synapse is amazing and the Resident Evil 4 VR Remake is without a doubt a top 5 PSVR2 title, this lack of games has not only alienated and angered early adopters.
What lack of games? What are you talking about? There is no lack of games. I'm drowning in games. I'm in forums with hundreds of people. They're all drowning in games. They've got a huge backlog. What are you talking about? Yes, there are comments out there. You can find comments out there claiming that, oh, there's nothing on PSVR 2. But again, a little bit of digging, you might find a lot of those accounts are anonymous and suspect, because there's a lot of trolling. There's a lot of bot farms. There's a lot of trying to control the narrative, and people, again, making these criticisms that don't add up.
Feel cheated by the complete and utter disinterest that Sony has shown the PSVR 2, but it has
complete and utter disinterest. Mate, if you want to make a point, you will be taken more seriously if you avoid hyperbole. You are exaggerating all of your points to a huge degree. Sony completely and utterly abandoned VR. You know, again, I'm not going to keep repeating the counterpoints that I've already made.
Further incentivize individuals looking to jump into VR to look elsewhere, as it is hard to justify buying a headset that also requires you to own a separate console. And yeah, by the way, we're treating this headset that costs.
If you want a comparable quality VR experience, you need PC VR. And that's going to cost you around $3,000 for a PC and a headset that matches the performance level of PSVR2. 3 times as much money to get the same performance as PSVR2. Or you can settle for Quest, a lot cheaper, but you will be playing VR games that look like they were made on a PS2. I'm ready for high fidelity VR. I'm ready for the next level. I don't want to be stuck in this low quality VR. I don't want that. You know, I want the high quality graphics. If you compare Saints and Sinners Retribution on Quest 3 and Saints and Sinners Retribution on PSVR 2, it is night and day. It is several generations different. You know, I don't want that. I don't want that low detail, low quality, low poly, you know, old looking VR. I don't want that anymore. You know, I'm ready for the next level, and you can only get that currently on PSVR 2 or PC VR. And again, if you make that comparison, it's an absolute bargain to get into PSVR 2.
More than the console itself as an accessory to said console and our store.
That's, you know, that's another clickbait thing. More than the console itself. You try and buy a headset that matches that quality on PC, you're spending over $1,000. So it's the cheapest headset by at least 100% with that level of performance. So it's an absolute bargain when you're making comparisons that are logical. It might cost more than the console, but that's only highlighting the fact that a PS5 is $500. To get the same level of performance on a PC headset, you need a $2,000 PC. Make that comparison, then your point doesn't hold up.
Isn't nearly as robust as our competitors, but we're also not going to support it in any capacity. Really, nigga? Now, I do not think that this is in any way, shape, or form what Sony intended with this one, but ultimately, the non-existent games library combined with piss-poor marketing and seemingly every game...
Non-existent game library. It's a non-existent game library. If you go on PSVR 2, there are 0 games listed on the store for PSVR 2. You don't sound like a serious human being when you make ridiculous exaggerations like this, VR Voyager. Come on.
Slated to be porting over, being hampered by delays, truly has made the PSVR 2's first year a full-scale disaster. And it is a major contributing factor to why the PSVR 2 currently only holds a paltry 5% market share compared to the 75% dominance that Meta currently enjoys in this.
Right, yeah. I don't think there's going to be anything more really worth responding to. My God, this video is already in over an hour. Let's stop there. Guys, till the next one. Bye-bye.